This is the Game of Life. It was originally called the Checkered Game of Life when it was first introduced by Milton Bradley in 1860. However, the Checkered Game of Life was more similar to the popular Snakes and Ladders at the time, with players making decisions about morality instead of finances on their way towards the finish line. Morality was such a central theme to the game that Milton Bradley removed dice due to their sinful connotation and replaced them with what's called a teetotum, or a six-sided top that would help players determine how far to move. On the 100th anniversary of Milton Bradley, a new version of the Game of Life was released and heartily endorsed by popular radio personality Art Linkletter. The new version of the Game of Life focused on players making their way towards a healthy retirement, making financially prudent decisions along the way. Gone were the tests and decisions about morality, being replaced with decisions about investments and higher education. Today, I've got a copy of the original 1960 Milton Bradley edition of the Game of Life and a copy of the 2021 Hasbro edition. I'd like to take a look at these games and see what's changed and what stayed the same over the course of about 60 years. Let's get started with the original 1960 edition Milton Bradley Game of Life. First off, look at the size of this box, okay? This has 38 counties and it's represented by 2 U.S. senators. This is huge, but it's got that classic Game of Life logo and art on it. This is, by today's standards, unmistakable, but how could you tell what was included just by looking at this box? I mean, when you flip it over, it's completely blank. So this is relatively sparse, and you're basically going off of Art Linkletter's endorsement. Now, many younger viewers probably don't know who Art Linkletter is, and I'm not going to pretend that I knew who he was before doing this video, but he was a popular radio personality at the time, and this endorsement came along when he was pretty late in his career. Anyway, it's just kind of funny that they have a celebrity endorsement. This would be akin to having like Joe Rogan or Simon Cowell or some other popular personality endorsing a board game with little to no connection to its origin. So it's pretty funny. When we open it up, the presentation is really nice. They actually have some nice sorters that are usable in the game. The lids pop off of the cash and part sorters and serve as these little holders and organizers that you'll use as you're playing the Game of Life. The game board inside the box, when it's folded up, looks really nice and luxurious. The back is, of course, printed with the Game of Life logo. And you have this little strip of numbers here. Now, that's important to the gameplay later, but again, makes for a nice presentation. So overall, the box that came with the original 1960 edition of the Game of Life, I would say it fails at telling you what the game really is. I mean, it's got the classic silver Milton Bradley stripe, but it really just gives you an age range, no description of the game, and this nice 100th anniversary seal. But the presentation is great. I mean, the box looks wonderful. It's just, if we didn't know the Game of Life, and this is debuting, this is their debut, so they were relying heavily on television advertisements and other photographic print ads in order to let you know what you were in store for with the Game of Life, because otherwise you've got no idea what you're getting. So let's have a look at the 2021 Hasbro edition of the Game of Life. Now, right away, we've got some clear references to the original Game of Life art with the font and the titling on front. Now, the front of the box has this cutaway where you can actually play with the spinner or sample the spinner, which is neat. I'm not so hot on it for storage purposes because it's not going to keep this very clean or protected, but it makes for a nice shelf display. Also, the bright, vibrant, cartoony art really lets you know what kind of game you're in store for. You've got the car, which is a central element, and the pegs that are a little bit more personified. It's just very neat. When we flip it over, we've got a nice close-up photo of the board, and you can see all the elements of the game and some blurbs about what the gameplay is like. However, they don't depict anybody playing the game at all. So what's interesting is Normally, a lot of board games, you'll see a depiction of people playing the game together, and I'm noticing some of these board games are starting to stray away from that in the modern era. So this is a good example of that. This is a lift-off top box, so the quality of the box is really nice. What kind of bothers me is this cutout here, because like I said, it doesn't really protect anything in the game. This little plastic caddy fits right inside, and I will say the organizer does a good job of keeping all the elements in place so they don't slide around too much in the box, but I wouldn't, carry this over to a friend's house like this. I'd be really handled with care. So it kind of bothers me because part of the nature of board games is being able to store them safely, and the box is supposed to protect them so you can take them over to a friend's house and play them. Portability is key. But with that being said, the display for this box is very nice. This definitely is made with retail display in mind more so than practical storage. So, I mean, in that regard, it succeeds, but I wish that they were a bit more practical with their storing solution with this. I wish, at the very least, if you're going to show off the spinner, I would prefer to have a little sheet of plastic or something like that just to keep all the parts inside the box safe. Now let's have a look at the original 1960 Milton Bradley Game of Life. Right away, this game board makes a huge visual impact. We've got all of the buildings, we've got the spinner right in the middle there, just very much drawing attention to it. We've got all of these landscape pieces with these mountains that the characters will drive through. Everybody starts with a car and they choose a peg to display themselves. They're very simple. They just have blue and pink pegs and a number of colors for the cars. I've got the blue and pink car on display because it's visually pleasing to have opposing colors. But it's nice. So you got these little plastic pieces with 6 peg holes, and that implies that as you play along, you will accrue a spouse and eventually have kids, which those kids and your spouse will help add up to your total score at the end of the game. So the new Game of Life is really much more of a financial experience than anything else. Right away at the outset of the game, players will be presented with opportunities to purchase auto insurance and to whether or not to attend college, which will assign them a career. Throughout the game, as they pass over these red payday spaces, they will draw a wage. Depending on what their career is, that'll determine, how much they earn through the course of their life. Now, other windfalls and losses await them as well, as players will have the opportunity to take revenge on each other, which I found fascinating. There are these green revenge places where you can take money from another player. There are opportunities for players to invest and opportunities for players to wager. A player can actually wager a limited amount of money on what another player spins when they are spinning the wheel. So what's really funny is the original Game of Life being based on morality. Milton Bradley went so far as to remove dice from the game and replace it with a teetotum, or this 6-sided top that players would spin, and depending on what side it landed on, it'd have marked pips to tell you how far you went. It was basically just dice, only with, extra steps. I mean, you spin instead of roll. It was really kind of the idea of replacing dice with a teetotum simply because dice might encourage somebody to gamble. That's like replacing beef with pork because you want to convince somebody not to eat meat. It's just a different type of meat. So it's kind of a weird deal. Now, that being said, what's even funnier is in the modern edition of the Game of Life, finances are a central theme, which then you're wagering using the spinning wheel, which is a nod to the teetotum. So, I mean, a lot of the original lessons that Milton Bradley wanted to be baked into the Game of Life are really gone. So the modern version of the Game of Life is very materialistic. You're spending a lot of time making decisions to help you accrue more wealth by the end of the game. Now, the interesting thing is you have revenge, which I thought was kind of an interesting negative connotation in the game, but also at the end of the game, or the third act of it, you have the Day of Reckoning that basically determines whether you end up at the poor farm or millionaire acres. And like I said, at the end of the game, you end up counting out all of your insurance policies, how many kids you have, and adding up the monetary value of your net worth, and whoever has the highest net worth at the end of the game wins. Also in this game, when you land on a payday space by exact count, you get these cards, and they can have things like share the wealth, where a player is forced to share their payment to the bank with you, so you profit off of their loss. Or you get these neat exemption cards where you can basically say nope to that. So these are really the only cards that affect anything. Everything else, you're just at the mercy of the wheel, your reckless wagering, and your prudent investment in either insurance or stocks. You can also draw money from the bank that you'll have to pay interest on at the end of the game. There are a few choices, but they're mainly at the beginning when it's higher education and when you land or pass over spots that let you choose whether to get married or purchase insurance or invest. Otherwise, the places where the paths cross, they will provide different outcomes based on the spaces that you land on, but there are no special events at these intersections here. So that's an interesting point of note. But otherwise, this was a blast to play. I had a lot of fun with it. I gotta say, the visual impact of the board is a huge portion of the game's value. As far as vintage games, this has to be one of the most premium games that I've looked at. I mean, they really wanted to knock it out of the park with this, so no wonder Milton Bradley tracked down celebrity endorsement and pulled out all the stops of the design. It is still a little weird to me that the track is black with white print, though I am a fan of night mode on my phone, so I mean, that tickles me, but it definitely takes away from how welcoming and exciting the game is because it looks a little bit more stark. But the rest of the colors on the background are really nice, albeit it looks like some sort of odd psychedelic camouflage when you scrutinize it, with buildings and landscapes sort of dashed in. So it's kind of funny because we haven't gotten to that part of the 60s when this was released, but already you see some indications of the art style slipping that way. Also, a neat little detail that I thought was fun was Art Linkletter and Milton Bradley are featured on dollar bills in the game. However, the rest of the denominations feature random fictitious characters. So it was pretty fun. But overall, the original 1960 Game of Life, it's a lot of fun. So I highly recommend tracking down a vintage copy because the rule set is going to be different when we get it in the new one. Now let's have a look at the 2021 Hasbro edition of the Game of Life. Right away we see the board is quite a bit smaller, however the colors are much more vibrant and there's a whole lot more going on. I like how they took the game pegs and stylized them with little hairdos, glasses, the little outfits, and show them going about their business on the board. Thematically, it's really nice. And in this modern edition, we no longer are restricted to pink or blue pegs. Now we have purple and red, green, all kinds of different colors here. We've also got much more brightly colored cars. They're still six-seaters, but they're a little bit more brightly colored. The ones that we had in the 60s were a little more pale. Also, you'll notice the number board for wagering from the 60s has now just been incorporated on the board as part of the investment process of the game. So players will get these investment cards and they'll be able to choose which number to invest in during the game. And each time another player spins and lands on their number, they will get a payout for their investment. So I thought that was a really nice way to incorporate the stock market and that classic portion of the original Game of Life while changing it up and making it more relevant. Now, players will right away be presented with the decision to choose going to college or right into their career, which will determine their wage. However, throughout the game, they will get multiple opportunities to change careers, which is interesting because you didn't get that in the 60s, and that also makes the game feel like it has a more modern theme. Now, you will see there are friend spaces on the board, so when you land on those spots, you add a friend to your car. So they kind of sidestep the nuclear family in this one. which is okay. We have a lot of non-traditional families and they're trying to appeal to a broader audience. So again, a different, more modern update to the game, but it still stays true to the original themes. Now, at a lot of these intersections on the board, you'll see there are these little stop signs, and these stop signs, you will actually stop and get a chance to make a decision. So instead of where these crossroads happened and you are more or less just kind of choosing the route in the game, they make it a bit more of an event. So for instance, you have stop, get married, or stop, grow your family, or stop, retire early. So again, they do have some opportunities to like have a family and have some traditional stuff going on, but it's a lot more of a looser, open dynamic, which I found to be an interesting change to the game. That being said, you also have the opportunity to buy a house and upgrade your house, which is part of your net worth. You have opportunities to invest and change your investments. You have opportunities to get pets even, which is also pretty cool. So they're not as focused on insurance and investment in the original as they were in the original game, and instead they're focusing on a little bit more of the random nature of life, and it seems a little bit more like relationship career balancing in this one, as opposed to, I guess, following a more set path where you're kind of going through the motions and making obvious prudent decisions. In this modern version, it feels like the chaos reigns a little bit more openly, so there's a bit more random chance to the outcome of the game, which I like. You still have plenty of choices to make, but a central theme to both of these is dealing with the random losses and windfalls that'll happen to you in life. So in that regard, it does a good job. Now, you'll land on these yellow spaces, and these will have actions, and you'll draw one of these little yellow action cards, and this is part of the game that I think is really hilarious. So in 1860, when Milton Bradley created the Checkered Game of Life, he removed dice from the game because of their association with gambling and the sinful connotation at the time, replaced it with a teetotum, which in my opinion is kind of a half-hearted attempt to sidestep the function of dice. We get a nod to that with the spinners in the Game of Life, which now incorporate gambling as part of the game. They remove gambling in the modern version and change it to investment, so it's a little bit less of a wager and more of an actual investment, which is nice. But then they reintroduce gambling with a much more on-the-nose example, because this spinner has red and black spaces on the center ring, and some of these actions you'll spin and it'll say if you land on red or black, you'll get a different outcome. So they still can't help themselves. The modern version of life, whether it's the one from 1960, which is basically the basis for the modern, or the current, they still kind of lean towards incorporating gambling in some way, when it was such a big problem with the inception of the first one that Milton Bradley wanted to remove gambling or any resemblance of gambling. So to me, that's a really funny detail in all of these modern versions of the Game of Life. Well, and just the Game of Life in general. Replacing dice with a teetotum, like I said, it's a very half-hearted attempt to sidestep what dice do functionally in the game. One thing I'll note is the dollar bills do not have faces on them at all. They're just very much Game of Life Hasbro branded marker for cash, and the denominations go up higher, all the way up to $500,000, whereas the largest denomination in the original Game of Life was 100,000. So again, a reflection of the times. Now, let's have a look at the rule books, starting with the 1960 edition. And I'm so excited. The rules are printed on the underside of the lid of the box, which I love because you will not lose them and they are almost indestructible. So when it comes to printing rules on the underside of the lid of the box, this pleases the couch. So I gotta say, A+ to the 1960 Milton Bradley edition of the Game of Life, because it's not a small rule set. That's probably why this box is so big. That's probably why it feels like a monolith that maybe I should make offerings to and Hope that it has mercy on me. I don't know. It seems like it has strange power. Whenever anything gets to this size, I start to get a little megalophobia. So let's have a look at the rule book for the 2021 edition. And book I'm using loosely. This is a piece of just regular unsealed bond paper, full color print, full bleed. Very nice though. It's kind of an unusual size, so square cut, but it won't have any weak spots from folding, and it fits nicely in the box. There's a little organizer that's approximately the same size that it fits right on top of. It's about the same size as the game board when folded in quarters, so very easy to keep safe and clean. I would have liked to see like a shiny sealed paper, but that's really splitting hairs at this point. The only downfall to this is, again, when the rules are not printed on the box, you have a greater chance of losing them or having them degrade faster. So win to the 1960 edition. So now let's get to the nitty gritty. Which one do I think is better? They're both good. I wouldn't say better. I would say they're different flavors of gameplay. I actually really appreciate, I understand that the theatricality being gone, you know, like we're removing a lot of these little plastic buildings and everything in the modern version. But on the same note, I really don't think that it damaged the gameplay too much. I am a sucker for games like this though. I'm a sucker for set piece games. They have a draw, and so I'm gonna say that style-wise, I still prefer the Game of Life from the 1960s. But when you look at how they set up the banker caddy, the spinner, and the overall ingenious way that the board is designed on the 2021 edition, this is a great game. This is a great value for what you're getting. I still think there's a lot of fun to be had. I think the parts are really nicely made. I mean, when you look at the plastic components of the new Game of Life versus the original, there's a significant jump in quality and material. And Hasbro did include this zipper sealed bag. This reusable zipper sealed bag came with this Game of Life, and the cards were wrapped in little paper bands. So they actually did hold to not having a whole lot of plastic waste, which I actually received a counterfeit version of this game, and I thought it was hilarious. The counterfeit version had a ton of plastic waste. I have another video I'll link in the description so you can see the comparison between this and the counterfeit. It's really fascinating. But the Hasbro edition, they were responsible. They included storage solutions, so they knew that we would be upset about this cutout in the box. And I will say, this caddy does keep the cash and the cards relatively safe. But again, if they got shaken up quite a bit, they will start to fall out of this. So I'm still frustrated with this cutout here. So overall, I would say that the gameplay of the modern version is very nice. It's a very nice update. I like that you can change careers. I like that you have that flexibility. I like the style that they went with artistically, albeit that some of these guys on here, the style that they painted them in, they look very hipster. I think some of them are definitely very opinionated about avocado toast. So that kind of made me chuckle. But again, they're caricatures of the time, so it makes sense. Not a big fan of quarter folding boards, but it's efficient. So I would say the modern Game of Life by Hasbro is a great value and still very much worth picking up. I love the addition of investments too. I thought that was really cool. I really enjoyed the 1960 edition, albeit you're very much nailed down to your fate in a lot of regards. You get a couple decisions, but the pathways when you reach these little crossroads, it's not like get married, have a kid, or midlife spin out, or retire early. It all is basically you're choosing a route which will have a different outcome, but it's a lot more subtle. So you kind of got to count your spaces out and go, well, I'll land here and it'll be nice. You know, it's a very short-term reward for making that decision. Your major decisions are purchasing insurance and going to college. That's about it. Otherwise, you're dealing with the random slings and arrows of life. However, that being said, I'm a sucker for all the little plastic buildings. I wish that the art was more vibrant and reflected like a landscape that they were on or a community that they were in, as opposed to just basically looking like early 1960s psychedelic camouflage with a river. But it was a lot of fun. I had fun with both of them. I know this isn't the be-all and end-all. There are tons of versions of the Game of Life out there. I remember there was a huge redesign in the early 90s that was a little bit more reflective of this original 1960 edition, but there are tons of modern variations that Hasbro offers as well. So, and I think there's a lot of value. I like when the game changes and evolves over time, but it really just adds to the flavor and offers a little bit of spice. So I gotta know, have you played the Game of Life? Which version is your favorite? Was there a year that I don't have on display that has something unique that you liked? Comment below and let me know. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.